You're seriously asking for a hall pass to cheat on me, Kyle? I leaned against the kitchen counter, clutching my coffee mug like it was the only thing keeping me from exploding. Kyle glanced up from his cereal, unbothered. Yes, Macy. Honesty is crucial. You love my transparency, right? Flabbergasted, I stared at him, trying to find the right words. Do what you want, Kyle, but remember, actions have consequences. I looked away, my gaze drifting to the suburban tranquility outside our window. The peaceful setting felt like a cruel mockery of the chaos in my heart. My thoughts were interrupted when he spoke again, far too casually. You spent $1,200 on a night out? What were you thinking? I could hear the disbelief in my own voice. My client wanted to go. I had to be honest and tell you. Isn't that what matters? Kyle's voice held that sickeningly logical tone he always used when justifying his outrageous behavior. I slammed my mug on the counter, coffee sloshing over the edge. Your honesty doesn't make it okay, Kyle. Do you understand how hard I work to balance our budget? He shrugged, not even looking up. You'll figure it out. You always do. Anger bubbled up inside me. I stepped closer. Kyle, you're so wrapped up in yourself. We're on the brink, and you're pushing us further away each day. Kyle finally met my eyes, his indifferent expression infuriating me further. I'm being truthful with you, Macy. Isn't that what we agreed on when we got married? His words hit me like a ton of bricks, and I scoffed. Being honest doesn't give you a free pass to disrespect our marriage. Don't twist this. He went back to his cereal, mumbling something under his breath. I couldn't catch it, but I didn't need to. His actions spoke louder than words ever could. The phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Lisa, my best friend. Perfect timing. I turned away from Kyle and answered it. Hey, Lisa. Macy, you sound stressed. What's up? Lisa's comforting voice brought a momentary relief. I sighed. Kyle spent $1,200 at a strip club and thinks being honest about it makes it okay. There was a pause on Lisa's end. Then she sighed too. Macy, you deserve better than this. He's taking advantage of your kindness. A bitter laugh escaped me. He calls it honesty. I call it manipulation. Lisa didn't hesitate. You need to set boundaries, Macy, or he's going to keep walking all over you. I glanced back at Kyle, now fully engrossed in his phone, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. Yeah, Lisa, you're right. I need to do something. That night, as we prepared for bed, I turned to Kyle. Kyle, will you always be honest with me? He turned, a smirk on his face as if he was victorious in some twisted game. Of course, Macy. Always. I nodded, a resolve hardening inside me. It was time to take action. Macy, check this out. Kyle called from the living room. I entered to find him admiring a shiny new wristwatch. Another designer watch? Your third this year? I couldn't mask the frustration in my voice. It was on sale. The store clerk was so persuasive. You know I couldn't say no. He flashed a smile, thoroughly pleased with himself. Couldn't say no, I repeated, struggling to keep my composure. Kyle, we're trying to save for a down payment on a house. Do you understand that? Kyle rolled his eyes, waving off my concern. It's just a watch, Macy. You're blowing this out of proportion. No, Kyle, you are. You act like our budget doesn't matter. I'm tired of you treating our money like it's a bottomless pit. He shrugged, dismissively. What's the big deal? We'll bounce back? We always do. I felt my patience snapping. We? Do you hear what you're saying? I am the one fixing your messes while you keep digging us deeper. Kyle's expression hardened. Don't get all high and mighty, Macy. I earn my keep, too. Sure, and then you blow it on toys like this new watch. I turned away, my mind racing with how to manage yet another financial blunder caused by his careless spending. Later that evening, I met Lisa at our favorite coffee shop. She was already sitting at a corner table, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. You looked like you needed a break, she said as I sat down. You have no idea, I sighed, dropping my purse onto the table. Kyle bought another expensive watch. No discussion, no thought about our finances. Just, oh look, shiny. Lisa frowned and leaned in. Macy, this isn't just about the watch, is it? No, it's about everything. He's making decisions like I'm not even here. And when I call him out, he just shrugs it off. I feel like I'm screaming into a void. I rubbed my temple, trying to fend off the impending headache. Lisa took my hand. You've been more than patient, Macy. But if he doesn't respect you or your marriage, you need to decide what's next. Her words hit home. I nodded slowly, feeling a new resolve take shape. You're right. I can't keep doing this. When I got home, Kyle was sprawled on the couch, engrossed in another mindless show. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. He looked up briefly and grinned. Hey, Mace, come sit. You've got to see this episode. I shook my head, a strange calm washing over me. Maybe later, Kyle. I have some things to think about. As I climbed the stairs, I knew a confrontation loomed on the horizon. Kyle's actions were tearing us apart, and my patience was running thin. Lisa's words echoed in my mind. I need to decide what's next, and I knew that meant taking control before there was nothing left to salvage. Macy, I've got to talk to you about something, Kyle said one evening, his tone oddly serious. I set the laundry basket down and faced him. What is it now, Kyle? He scratched his head, avoiding my eyes. Jenna called. She needs to talk to me alone. Can I go? I felt my pulse quicken. Seriously, Kyle? You know what's going to happen. He sighed, playing the innocence card. Macy, it's just a talk. She's going through some stuff and needs a friend. A friend? I fumed. She's your ex-girlfriend. You know this isn't about being just a friend. He stepped closer, trying to look sincere. You always say honesty is important. I wanted to be upfront with you. I crossed my arms, feeling the weight of every compromised boundary. Fine, Kyle, go. But don't expect me to be okay with it. Kyle grabbed his jacket, the hint of a smirk on his face. Thanks, Macy. I'll be back soon. As the door closed behind him, an eerie calm filled the house. I sank into the couch, tension thrumming through my veins. It felt like a silent storm brewing, and I wasn't sure how much more I could take. I sat there, staring at the door for what seemed like hours. The silence felt like a judgment, reminding me of all the times I had given in, hoping things would get better. My phone buzzed. A text from Lisa. How's it going? I quickly typed back, he's gone to see Jenna. 2 minutes later, my phone rang. Macy, Lisa's voice was filled with concern. You let him go, I sighed heavily. I did. He played the honesty card again. Macy, this is getting out of hand. He's manipulating you because he knows you'll let it slide. I know, Lisa, but I just needed to see how far he'd go. There was a bitter edge to my voice. Then what's your plan? Lisa asked. I'm not sure yet. I admitted. But I'm not going to let him keep walking over me. I could hear the resolve in Lisa's voice. You need to draw the line, Macy. For good. When Kyle returned late that night, I was still on the couch. He hesitated in the door, probably expecting a barrage of questions. But I just looked at him, feeling a mix of disappointment and resignation. How's Jenna? I asked, unable to hide the sarcasm. He shrugged. She's better now. Just needed someone to listen. I nodded slowly, my anger barely contained. Glad to hear it. Kyle seemed to relax and moved to sit beside me, but I stood up before he could. I'm going to bed. We'll talk tomorrow. As I climbed the stairs, I could feel Kyle's confusion. I needed him to understand that his actions were eroding the foundation of our marriage. I was done playing by his rules. It was time to take control, before there was nothing left to save. A few nights later, I heard Kyle on the phone in the kitchen. His voice was low, but the house was silent enough that I could catch snippets of the conversation. I moved quietly, inching closer to hear better. Macy is so gullible. Kyle laughed softly into the phone. She lets me get away with everything. My heart pounded as I pressed myself against the wall. The voice on the other end, unmistakably Jenna's, responded, You really chose the perfect wife for your schemes. Rage bubbled up inside me, but I forced myself to stay hidden and silent. I needed to know how deep this betrayal went. Yeah, Kyle replied. She's a pushover. I can practically do anything, and she just takes it. Good for us, right? Jenna's tone was light, almost mocking. Kyle laughed again, that familiar coldness in his voice. Absolutely. Anyway, I've got to go. Talk later. I heard the click of the phone and the rustle of Kyle moving around. I slipped back into the living room, heart racing, but my face set in a calm mask. When Kyle wandered in a few moments later, he seemed unaware of my presence. Hey, you okay? He asked casually. Just thinking, I replied, my voice steady. How was your call? Kyle shrugged. Has nothing important, just catching up with an old friend. I nodded, swallowing my anger. Glad to hear it. That night, lying in bed next to him, my mind raced with possibilities. The betrayal cut deep, but it also fueled a new sense of determination. I wasn't going to let him and Jenna trample over me any longer. The next day, I made a plan. I started by quietly gathering evidence of Kyle's deceit. I documented his suspicious financial transactions, saved his shady text messages, and made notes of his questionable outings. The more I dug, the clearer the pattern became. One evening as we were having dinner, I looked across the table at Kyle. "Kyle, will you always be honest with me?" He met my gaze without flinching. "Of course, Macy, always." I forced a smile, hiding my true intentions. "Good, I'm counting on it." As Kyle continued eating, oblivious, I felt a grim satisfaction. I began reaching out to the key figures who needed to know the truth. First, I contacted his boss, Rick, then Jenna's husband, Tom. I wanted to ensure they saw Kyle for who he truly was. In the quiet of our home, my plan took shape. Every small detail fell into place, driven by the cold anger burning inside me. Kyle's carelessness and deceit had set the stage, and now it was my turn to act. The day of reckoning was coming, and I was ready to unveil the truth, no matter the cost. I glanced at Kyle, still engrossed in his meal. He had no idea what was coming, and that thought gave me strength. This was just the beginning. The fallout from his so-called honesty was about to crash down, and he wouldn't see it coming. The next few weeks were a blur as I meticulously collected evidence against Kyle. Every lie, every deceitful action, meticulously recorded and preserved. I enlisted Lisa's help to ensure I didn't miss a single detail. One evening, Kyle and I sat in the living room. He was busy with his phone while I pretended to read a book. I looked up and asked, "Kyle, what would you do if you found out I lied to you?" He chuckled, still staring at his screen. "Why would you even ask that? You're the honest one, remember?" I forced a laugh. "Just curious, since you value honesty so much." He shrugged. "We'd have to deal with it, I guess, but I trust you wouldn't lie." I nodded, my heart hardening. Right. Well, honesty is important. Over the next few days, I quietly reached out to various people Kyle had fooled, gathering stories and evidence. Once I felt ready, I made a final plan with Lisa. The night before the big reveal, Kyle sat down next to me. "You seem distracted lately, Macy. Everything all right?" "Just work stress," I lied smoothly. "Nothing to worry about." He bought it, leaning back with a satisfied smile. "Good. Keep me posted if you need anything." I wished he understood how much I needed, but I kept my silence, knowing tomorrow would bring everything into the open. The following evening, I asked Kyle if we could host a small get-together. He agreed, probably thinking it would just be friends. As guests arrived, I could see the confusion on Kyle's face. Rick, his boss, entered first, followed by Jenna's husband, Tom. Kyle greeted them, but his unease was palpable. "Didn't expect to see you all here," he muttered, mostly to himself. As everyone settled in, I glanced at Lisa, who nodded subtly. I cleared my throat, feeling everyone's eyes on me. "Thank you all for coming. There are some things we need to discuss." Kyle shifted uncomfortably. "Macy, what's going on?" I took a deep breath. "Kyle, you've always valued honesty. Tonight we're going to be very honest with each other." Rick stepped forward, holding a folder. "Kyle, I need to talk to you about these expense reports. They don't add up. How do you explain the company funds spent at strip clubs?" Kyle paled, fumbling for words. I can explain. It's not what it looks like." Tom stood up, anger flashing in his eyes. "And what about Jenna? You've been sneaking around, lying to both of us. Care to explain that?" Kyle turned to me, desperation in his gaze. "Macy, what have you done?" I met his eyes, my voice steady. "Just keeping everything honest, Kyle. You taught me that, remember?" The room erupted in a flurry of accusations and denials. Kyle's facade crumbled before my eyes, and I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Rick announced Kyle's termination for misconduct, sealing his fate. As the confrontation wound down, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Kyle's deceit had been exposed, and now it was time to move forward. Our life would never be the same, and for the first time in a long while, that prospect felt like freedom. Kyle paced the living room, a mixture of panic and anger in his eyes. "Macy, you betrayed me. How could you do this?" I stood my ground. "You betrayed our marriage long before I exposed the truth, Kyle." He ran his hands through his hair, frustration evident. "You've ruined everything. My job, my reputation. It's all gone." Rick, who was still there, shook his head. "Kyle, what's this I hear about you using company funds at strip clubs? Do you have any idea the kind of trouble you've put yourself and the company in?" Kyle's shoulders slumped. "Rick, I can explain. It was just one mistake." Rick's expression was stern. One mistake? This has been going on for months. You've been taking advantage of us all. Tom stepped forward, fury etched on his face. And you've been sleeping with my wife, Kyle. How do you explain that? Kyle turned to me, desperation and resentment mingling in his eyes. Macy, what have you done? I looked at him, feeling the weight of everything he had put me through lift as I said, just keeping everything honest, Kyle. Rick walked up to Kyle. You're terminated, effective immediately. We'll be conducting a full investigation. Kyle's face fell. Terminated, Rick, please, Tom interjected. And as for Jenna, we'll see if there's anything left to salvage. But know this, Kyle, you've wrecked our lives. Kyle turned back to me, hands trembling. We were fine. Why now? We were never fine, Kyle, I said quietly. I was surviving. Now I'm done. I had everyone's attention then, and it felt like a final exclamation point on a long sentence of deceit. Kyle's eyes filled with disbelief. Macy, you can't just walk away. I shook my head. I can and I will. I handed him a manila envelope containing the divorce papers. This is for you. It's time for both of us to move on. Kyle stood there, stunned. You can't mean this. I do, I said, my voice steady. And don't think you can talk your way out of it. This is happening. As the crowd dispersed, Tom and Rick gave me understanding nods. Lisa, who had stood by silently, finally stepped forward and hugged me. You did it, Macy. I nodded, the enormity of what had happened sinking in. Yes, I did. Kyle watched us from across the room, his world crumbling while I felt the first sense of peace I'd had in years. It's time to start over, I whispered to Lisa. And for the first time, those words didn't feel like a hollow promise. They felt like the beginning of a new chapter, one where honesty wasn't a weapon, but a foundation for something real. A few days after the dust settled, Kyle's life had dramatically changed. He lost his job, his reputation was in tatters, and his days were spent in a hazy blend of denial and anger. I, on the other hand, had already begun looking for a new place to stay. I needed a fresh start, away from the toxic remnants of our life together. One evening, Kyle confronted me as I packed my bags. Macy, why now? We were fine. We could have worked things out. I zipped up my suitcase with finality. We were never fine, Kyle. You were blind to everything wrong because you never felt the consequences of your actions. Kyle's face twisted with frustration. We were partners. Why did you have to ruin everything? I looked at him, calm and resolute. Partners? You used me, lied to me, disrespected me. That's not a partnership. Kyle swallowed hard, his voice dropping. I can change. We can fix this. I shook my head, feeling a bittersweet pity. It's too late, Kyle. This isn't about fixing us anymore. This is about me finding peace. He collapsed on the couch, head in his hands. I just don't get it. We had a good thing. I stood over him, feeling the finality of my decision. We never had a good thing, Kyle. I was just surviving. Now I'm moving on. As I left the house with my bags, I felt a sense of liberation. The night air was cool, and each step away from the house was a step toward my future. I moved into a small apartment downtown. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and it represented a new beginning. Lisa helped me settle in, her presence a comforting reminder that I wasn't alone. A few days later, I served Kyle the divorce papers. He looked at them, disbelief and defeat etched on his face. So this is it? Yes, I said simply. This is it. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. Kyle didn't have much of a fight left in him after the fallout. His personal and professional ruins were too much to bear, and he had no choice but to sign the papers. As the final signatures were placed, Kyle asked one last question. Are you happy now? I met his gaze without hesitation. No, but I'm getting there. I deserve someone who values me for who I am, not for what they can get away with. The courtroom was silent as I walked out, leaving behind the legalities and the broken pieces of a life that once seemed unshakable. Back at my apartment, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was the freedom to find it. The first step had been taken, and the path forward was mine to explore. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years it was bright and full of possibilities. And that was enough, for now. As the weeks went by, the full weight of my actions came into focus. I had not only unmasked Kyle, but also reinforced my own strength. News of Kyle's downfall spread through our town. At first, I felt vindicated, but as time passed, I realized his isolation was also a consequence of my decisions. One evening, I received a call from Kyle. I hesitated, then answered. Hello, Macy, it's me, he said, his voice strained. What do you want, Kyle? I need to talk. Please, he replied, sounding genuinely broken. Curiosity got the better of me. Fine. Where? Can you meet me at our old place? He asked, almost pleading. I agreed reluctantly. As I drove to our former home, memories flooded my mind, the good and the bad all mixed together. When I arrived, Kyle was standing on the porch, looking like a shadow of his former self. Thanks for coming, he began, his voice hesitant. What do you want, Kyle? I asked, crossing my arms defensively. Just hear me out. I know I screwed up, big time, he admitted, his eyes avoiding mine. I've lost everything, Macy. My job, my reputation. No one wants anything to do with me. I felt a twinge of sadness, but reminded myself why we were here. Kyle, you brought this on yourself. You lied, cheated, and manipulated everyone around you. He nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. I know, and now I'm paying the price. Everyone has turned their back on me. I took a deep breath, grappling with my remaining feelings. You need to understand that actions have consequences. This isn't just about you being sorry. Kyle nodded, his voice cracked and desperate. I get it now. I really do. I wish I had understood before it all fell apart. I felt a pang of something, pity, maybe. Kyle, honesty can't just be a word you throw around. It has to mean something and be backed by actions. He looked at me, genuinely remorseful. I know, and I was too late to understand that. I'm sorry, Macy. There was a moment of silence as we stood on the porch, both absorbing the gravity of everything we had gone through. I hope you find a way to rebuild, Kyle, but it won't be with me, I said firmly. Kyle nodded, accepting my words. I understand. I turned to leave, feeling a sense of closure. As I drove away, the weight on my chest felt lighter. This chapter was coming to an end. When I reached my apartment, a sense of peace washed over me. Lisa called to check in. How did it go? It's over, Lisa. He finally understood, I replied, feeling the finality of my words. She sighed in relief. I'm proud of you, Macy. It's been a long road. Thanks, Lisa, I said, looking around my new place. I deserve someone who values me for who I am. That you do, my friend, she affirmed. As I hung up, I reflected on everything I had endured and overcome. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my life. And that, in itself, was a victory worth celebrating.